Hey guys, it is still November 11th. The November video marathon rolls on, and while I have some energy, I want to kind of pad it a little bit with some extra videos. Today I have some energy, still getting kind of hit hard, especially when I sleep, but I found some interesting articles and I wanted to kind of go through them. This article is about the Russian woodpecker, so I'm trying to just kind of build a base, showing people, non-TIs. A lot of TIs have probably studied a lot of this, but just to show non-TIs that this technology has been used. Some TIs have researched it, and they've used microwaves and sonic-based weapons. Psychotronic weapons as far back as like the 1940s. But I just wanted to show another article, from stuff as recent as the Cuban embassy attack to the U.S. embassy that was attacked in Moscow from the 1960s to the 1980s with microwaves. And then I just wanted to talk about the Russian woodpecker, and this is from Conspiracy Times. So I'm just going to go ahead and read the article. The Russian woodpecker, experiments in global mind control. In 1978, various U.S. researchers argued that a signal originating from within the Soviet Union, the so-called Russian woodpecker, was an experiment in global mind control. 30 years on, what do we know? And this is a picture of the Dugas 3 array outside of Chernobyl, which is kind of an over-the-horizon radar, huge apparatus that they have right outside of Chernobyl. Before sentencing Ira Einhorn to life in prison in 2002, Judge William Mazzola called him an intellectual dilettante who preyed on uninitiated, uninformed, unsuspecting, inexperienced people. Judge Mazzola also berated Einhorn for mentioning psychotronics, a word he stated that was not in the dictionary and therefore did not exist. Despite omissions from dictionaries, including Microsoft Word, which continues to underline it in red, psychotronics is an interdisciplinary science concerned with the interactions of consciousness, energy fields, and matter. There are thousands of references to it on the internet, and especially Representative Dennis Kucinich, a Democrat from Ohio, used the word in introducing the Space Preservation Act of 2001, H.R. 2977, and that's an important act that he tried to pass in 2001, H.R. 2977, on October 2nd, 2001, well before Mazzola's judgment. Kucinich described psychotronic devices as weapons that were directed at individual persons or targeted populations for the purpose of mood management or mind control. And whereas Mazzola seemed to think Einhorn had invented this pseudoscience, in truth, Einhorn was merely one of the first promoters of the potential dangers relatively new technology was posing to the nations of Earth. Writing in the winter of 1977-78 edition of Coevolution Quarterly, Einhorn wrote about the exact synchronicity between the so-called woodpecker's shortwave pulses and naturally occurring alpha brainwave frequencies. In his article, A Disturbing Communiqué, he advanced the opinion that the Russians were engaged in a sinister mind control experiment of Orwellian dimensions. They were sending out a specific beam across the Western world. Were they trying to brainwash the non-communist countries? Posing the question was sufficient for the Russian woodpecker to become associated with Einhorn. It was, for the woodpecker, an unfortunate situation to be in, as soon Einhorn would become the subject of a high-profile murder investigation. From the late 1970s onwards, the woodpecker signal was thus primarily used to prove that Einhorn was largely an intellectual dilettante. Research into the signal itself became marginalized. And that's a picture of Chernobyl after the explosion, but I don't think that had to do with directed energy weapons. No, it didn't. The Russian woodpecker was a Soviet signal that could be heard on a shortwave radio bands worldwide between July 1976 December 1989, the latter date marking the collapse of the communist regime in Soviet Union. It sounded like a sharp, repetitive tapping noise, giving rise to the woodpecker name. The signal could be replicated by tapping a pencil on a table between 8 and 14 times each second. The random frequency was heard on disrupted legitimate broadcast, amateur radio, and utility transmissions and resulted in thousands of complaints by countries worldwide to Moscow. The complaints were, however, nonspecific. It seemed that whatever the Russians were doing was interfering with business as usual in the West, and could the Russians please rectify the problem? The answer was "niet," but also invited another question: what was the signal? Today it is known that the signal came from the Duga-3 system, which was officially part of the Soviet anti-ballistic missiles early warning network, also known as over-the-horizon radar system, and it is this that the Soviet Union post 1989 gave as the official explanation. In principle, it therefore seemed to be a mundane cause and purpose, tied in with the Soviets' defense system and not with the global mind control technology. However, though Einhorn's name has become mostly associated with the conspiracy theories of the Russian woodpecker, he was not the first to put these thoughts to paper. In The Zapping of America, published in 1977, Paul Brodeur wrote that a report published in the New York Times on October 30, 1976, revealed that in recent months a mysterious broadband shortwave radio signal had been broadcast intermittently from the Soviet Union. The signal was so powerful that it disrupted radio and telecommunications through the world. Dr. Zaret is concerned about the Russian signal because of its potential hazard to human beings. It was very clear that such an encoding impressed onto carrier wavelengths could have a central nervous system effect. Dr. Milton Zaret had previously been retained to investigate the so-called Moscow signal, in which the U.S. Embassy in Moscow was found to be subjected to a microwave beam by the Soviet authorities. And I read about that on the last video. Today, most researchers tackling the woodpecker refer to Einhorn's article and not to Brodeur's book, even though Mazzola argued Einhorn often tried to pass himself off as a legitimate scientist when he was not. Einhorn seldom, if ever, made unsupported allegations. In this instance, he was not merely agreeing with Brodeur, but was also supported by his good friend and former military intelligence officer, Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Bearden, U.S. Air Force retired, who in retrospect correctly claimed this signal emanated from the Soviet Union and had been traced to an installation in the cities of Riga and Gomel, near Chernobyl. He added that it was emanating from a Tesla generator, and even claimed that the signal was responsible for weather modification wars covertly waged upon an unsuspecting United States citizenry by the wily and unscrupulous Russians. Specifically, he held the machine to be responsible for a drought in the western states, which ostensibly caused severe effects on farming and the economy in 1976. As far as conspiracy theories go, Bearden's went beyond the scope of Einhorn's. A new type of warfare. Since that time, a whole list of PhDs has added their support for such conclusions. David Brinkley testified about the woodpecker signal on NPC Magazine, broadcast on July 18, 1981. Dr. Andrew Mikrowski, technology specialist with the Canadian Department of State and president of the Planetary Association for Clean Energy, wrote that the signal was from a number of Tesla-type transmitters and that the USSR signals have been assessed by the Environmental Protection Agency to be psychoactive. Dr. Robert Beck measured the woodpecker signal, concluding, "We found the Soviet signal coming in like gangbusters, right in the window of human psychoactivity." Alas, the true purpose of the woodpecker remains the subject of speculation, largely because in the public mind it is merely tied to a single allegation of a convicted murderer. But even if that were the case, what few have realized is that Einhorn, at least to some extent, has been proven right. And there's a picture of Alan Dulles right there. Evil. In April 1953, CIA... Let's see, where am I right here? Okay. Yeah, in April 1953, CIA Alan Dulles gave a lecture at Princeton University detailing Soviet developments in the field of mind control. He stated they were out to control the mind of free men, both individually and collectively. He argued that brainwashing had effectively enabled the Soviets to tamper with the mind until it became a phonograph playing a disc put on its spindle by an outside genius over which it has no control. With this control now in place, Dulles proclaimed that the Cold War was moving into a new era of psychological warfare, which Dulles characterized as the battle for men's minds. We might call it, in its new form, brain warfare. His sentiments were echoed in 1955 when KGB chief Lavrentiy Beria, Dulles' Soviet counterpart, stated that there will never be an atomic war, for Russia will have subjected all of her enemies. In the 1970s, some of this secret war for our mind was exposed in a number of congressional inquiries, but most commentators seem to believe or accept that everything stopped, and largely that from the little information that had not been destroyed prior to the investigation began, it had been unsuccessful. Though the latter might have been the case in the mid-1970s, it is definitely clear that it did not end. Mind control in a small box. In 1984, Dr. Ross Addy, chief of research at the Pettus Memorial Veterans Hospital in Loma Linda, California, obtained from Soviet colleagues what is known as a mini woodpecker transmitter, labeled the LIDA, or LIDA, and apparently developed by Lev Rabishev and his colleagues in Soviet Armenia. The LIDA operated on a frequency of 40 megahertz and bombarded the brain with low-frequency radio waves. It was used experimentally by the Russians as a replacement for tranquilizers and their unwanted side effects. The pulsed radio waves were said to stimulate the brain's own electromagnetic current and produce a trance-like state. Addy had obtained a copy of the Russian-language manual describing use of the mini woodpecker, which said that it was a distant pulse treatment apparatus for psychological problems, including sleeplessness, hypertension, and neurotic disturbances. Interestingly, when the Associated Press reported on Addy's scoop, it concluded that the LIDA, may have been the forerunner of a device that is presently bombarding Europe and the United States with very powerful waves, an interesting conclusion and a direct reference to the big woodpecker. LIDA had not been approved for use with humans in the U.S., though it was known that the Russians had done so since at least 1960, according to Addy. This meant that they had ample time to build a bigger version. Officially unable to test it on humans, Addy said that he had put a cat in a box and turned on the LIDA. Within a matter of 2 or 3 minutes, it is sitting there very quietly. It stays almost as though it were transfixed, he said. That would definitely qualify LIDA as a behavior modification device, mind control. And this is Dr. Ross Addy in the LIDA machine right there. Okay. It is not the only interesting detail that resulted from this study. The Soviets included a picture with the device that showed an entire auditorium full of people asleep with the LIDA on the podium. The LIDA put out an electric field, a magnetic field, light, heat, and sound, and the purported purpose of the LIDA was for medical treatments. However, the North Koreans used it as a brainwashing device during the Korean War. The big question is, what did they do with the technology? It could have been improved and or made smaller. It is unlikely that they abandoned something that worked. This is a powerful confirmation that LIDA, the mini woodpecker, was able to be used on a semi-large scale, an auditorium, and had been used for brainwashing. This nefarious purpose was confirmed when Addy was testing the LIDA and an electrician was walking by and asked him where he got the North Korean brainwashing machine from. Ross told him that it was a Russian medical device. The man said he had been brainwashed by a device like that when he was in a POW camp. Bird said that they placed the vertical plates alongside his head and read questions and answers to him. He said he felt like he was in a dream. Later, when the Red Cross came and asked questions, he responded with what had been read to him while under the influence of the device. He said he seemed to have no control over the answers. The CIA sank